Carl Reed, speaking of a man who's got his phone charged and your phone's been ringing off the hook, your expectations for today and the next couple weeks in the spring transfer portal window?
My main expectation, Coop, is that you're going to see a lot of guys that are culling their rosters, that are removing guys from their program. This spring portal is more about having those uncomfortable meetings where you're telling guys, you're not quite good enough, you're not quite what we're looking for. It's time for you to find another program. It won't have the massive numbers that you had in the early transfer portal period, but you're going to have some key guys that may be looking for additional spots. It's going to be it's not going to be as much star power as it was, but there'll be a few key players involved. But for the most part, you're going to have guys that are going to be looking to make room on their rosters for other guys. And in addition to that, guys from the FCS and Group of 5 ranks that are looking to get paid, there's going to be some opportunities for those guys.
I agree with Carl. It's spring cleaning season over here in college football. It just kind of is what it is at this point. Players are getting paid through name, image, and likeness, and I think a lot of schools, even some you wouldn't expect, are starting to treat players in that way. So that's a bucket. I think there's a very small bucket of elite players who will enter the portal. We had one go in this morning in Jacoby Matthews, the former Texas A&M safety, 5-star recruit. Damian Martinez is expected to enter the portal. I think there will be 10 to 15 potentially season-altering players in the portal this cycle. And then there's that also a slightly larger bucket of Group of 5 and FCS players making the jump up, as we heard Matt say a little bit ago with Jalen Key going to Alabama, for example, last year. So those are the 3 buckets we should expect over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, we know in the springtime, it's time to add depth to your roster. So how many of these schools' front office has been doing a good job of combing through the FCS level and seeing those diamond in the roughs with the opportunity to now fulfill their team? Because at the end of the day, when you look at it, this is not going to be a big splash of players. But the teams that's been constructing their roster properly, been taking time to find the right depth guys, the 8th offensive lineman, the 7th defensive lineman, the 6th DB, or that veteran backup quarterback that you're going to need in game 8 this year because something might happen to your first guy. So the team that's been doing that, that's the expectation I have for this spring cycle when you look at it, but adding depth, but quality depth, and doing your proper homework at home to get this process going faster than it was before.
Busy day ahead, busy couple weeks ahead as well. And here's what we got on tap for today for the Transfer Portal Palooza. Breaking news on transfer portal entrants. We just talked about Jacoby Matthews. There will be a handful of names as well that will trickle throughout the rest of the day. We'll also have in-depth spring reports on teams with new head coaches. So if you're an Alabama fan, if you're a Michigan, Washington, Arizona fan, we'll get to your team here a little bit later in the day. We'll also have breakdown of positional needs for college football playoff contenders as well. So let's also break down the grading scale and what that looks like here in the transfer portal. 98 to 100, you see the rating on the left side, also what that means and what it correlates to. 5-star prospect all the way down to 2-star prospect. Our team, Derek Chang, Clint Brewster, doing a tremendous job updating that throughout the day. Also, we got some more facts because it is a fact-finding day. The transfer portal window, it runs through April 30th. How about this? Multi-time transfers will be allowed to transfer again without penalty. Also, there'll be a pause in policing and investigating collectives talking with transfers. So there is a lot going on, the changes to the portal in the rules since December window, obviously allowing multi-time transfers being at the top. Chris, one of the things that happened is that this date was originally supposed to open on May 1st. Well, it's April 16th here on a Tuesday. I think it was also April 15th on a Monday. Now we're here Tuesday. Why has that happened?
A lot of day changes with the NCAA recently. A lot of rule changes with the NCAA, which I know we'll talk about. I think it's a pretty simple explanation there. It, one, gives schools a little more flexibility this time of year. You are going to have coaches on the road soon. There's a 45-day window during this open contact period. It allows more flexibility for programs to bring players in for visits and also to balance the schedule of coaches going out on the road and evaluating and contacting high school recruits. And on the other side, it gives transfers a little more time to make their decisions and a little more time ahead of May and June enrollment. The December window, as we all know, is very hectic. It's a time where athletes have about 2 weeks to visit schools before making a decision for the spring enrollment, and this time around they get a little more time, about a month and a half window and runway before they have to enroll somewhere.
All right, let's talk about the multi-time transfer rule, because that is something that's coming into play in the spring portal window. And the name that we're going to talk about a little bit later, how about five-star Caden Proctor, played 14 games, started at left tackle for Alabama, obviously goes to Iowa, comes back to Alabama. That has kind of opened up this entire conversation. But now multi-time transfers are enabled, which basically leaves a guy like Caden Proctor the ability to go to Iowa, come back to Alabama unpenalized. How did we get here?
Messy court rulings. It's always about the court rulings right now with the NCAA. Their billing hours must be crazy. Shout out to the lawyers out there just making the world run in college athletics right now. Basically, a court case in West Virginia occurred where a couple basketball players sued the NCAA for the ability to play right away as multi-time transfers. The judge in West Virginia put an injunction in saying multi-time transfers could play right away. The NCAA backpedaled quickly, said transfers from the multi-time transfers in 2024 and 2025 can play immediately. So anybody who's transferred before can now transfer again. And now the NCAA is actually looking at applying that rule throughout a athlete's career moving forward. So I think the NCAA is trying to stay out of court as much as possible. But what that means is the Caden Proctors of the world can enter the portal and enter the portal again, and enter the portal again, and enter the portal again. I had a coach the other day tell me we think we're going to see a transfer play at 10 schools in 10 semesters at some point because of how crazy it's gotten, and that's the ability players have.
All right, there's been a pause in policing and investigating NIL collectives talking directly with transfers. And if there's an audience member out there right now, they're probably trying to figure out what is going on. I told you before we got on the show, I said, explain it to me like I'm 5, like I'm Michael Scott right now. So what does that mean in terms of how that might have an ability to impact some transfers in this window as well?
Basically, it's free game. Collectives are still not allowed to contact players ahead of time. Like, there would never be tampering in college athletics, and that definitely still doesn't happen, right? But once a player is in the portal, whereas before collectives were barred from negotiating their future salaries, now they can. So I guess I'm sorry to Caden Proctor to keep using you as an example, but you're kind of the poster child for this right now, I suppose. If Caden Proctor enters a portal officially today, which I think we expect him to do from Iowa, he can now negotiate with Alabama, his next school, actively for his contract, whereas before he was not allowed to do any of that before he was enrolled as a student. Those rules are now off the table, and collectives can play a larger role in the transfer recruiting process, whereas before the rules stipulated that they couldn't, and you could get hit with sanctions potentially for doing so. Schools like Miami have experienced the brunt of that so far with the Cavender twins when they were on campus in women's basketball.
All right, loaded question, but all in all these rules that we've talked about, we talked about the multi-time transfer rule, we talked about the collectives as well. What is the impact of these new rules as you see it going forward? And I know you kind of elaborated on it a little bit, but big picture-wise, maybe where you see the game going.
In the future, I assume, and I think everybody in college athletics that has a stake in it hopes collective bargaining. Because right now we use the term Wild Wild West far too often, but it really is. Like, there is no check on the transfer portal and NIL negotiations right now. Leverage for athletes is frankly incredible because there's no way to check and see what a person is making somewhere else. There are no accurate data points that schools can point to negotiate contracts. There's no database that says a player is making X. There are no contracts that locks a player in. There are schools that are starting to do 1, 2, and 3 year deals. I can think of several that have started doing that, but there's really nothing actually tying the player to a school. We're starting to see collectives right now structuring contracts around the transfer portal windows. So essentially you don't get your payout until, what would that be, May 2nd this year, if you're on the roster. So schools are having to get creative to maintain leverage and to keep players on the books. But moving forward in the future, collective bargaining is a way to solve all of this. Players would be either employees or at least salaried contracted employees, and they would be able to negotiate with schools directly. There would be salary caps. There would be structure and rules around the sport. And I think everybody in college athletics, at least those that are sensible, see that as the future. And I don't think we're too far away from it, to be honest.